Hi there, and welcome to another of the DTA screencasts. And in this session, we'll be looking at the political exploitation of the Olympics. So, as sport is now a global phenomenon, we've got to ask the question: can we actually separate politics from sport? So, we're going to look at some really good examples of that. Okay, so let's get started. So, the term that you're going to hear and that you should use in your essays or in your questions is this idea of a shop window. And in essence, what that means is the idea of the whole world being able to see what you're doing whilst you're holding the Olympics. So the shop window provides a medium through which the nation's interest can be promoted, but there's always a negative side to that. In the shop window, if things go wrong, then we'll also see that. And most of you will remember the green pool from Rio. All right, so let's just take a look back at the values of the Olympics that are supposed to be in there. The idea of promoting and developing the physical moral qualities, spreading the Olympic principles, bringing together athletes around the world, and to educate people through sport in a spirit of better understanding. What we've got to look at then is if those ideals are still in place in our modern Olympics. And just here, these are the other values that I've identified, which is the one about freeing Cody. So just take a look at those to recall that. Now at the end, can we argue whether those values are still in place? Okay, now the first one that we're going to look at is quite a famous one in 1936. This was Jesse Owens' Olympics, or Hitler's Games as it was originally called.
August 8th, 1936, American track star Jesse Owens shocked Hitler and the world as he won his 4th gold medal at the Summer Olympics in Berlin. Berlin had become the focus of world attention in 1936, when the Summer Olympics were held in Hitler's Germany. This was to be Hitler's greatest propaganda triumph. Not only would he show off his nation to the world, but he'd prove on the athletic field the superiority of his Aryan race.
Like a modern Caesar, he stands on the balcony to receive the salutes of the athletes of 50 nations.
Ich verkünde die Spiele von Berlin zur Feier der 11. Olympiade neuer Zeitrechnung als eröffnet.
The games were open, and Hitler's master race was on display. But his ideas of racial superiority were about to be repudiated by the performance of African-American athlete Jesse Owens. Owens, a track star from Ohio State University, had electrified college sports earlier in the year with his stunning performances. When the track and field competition began, Hitler was in attendance. He had come to watch his German team dominate their opponents. He even congratulated the first 3 gold medal winners. When Jesse Owens, Cornelius Johnson, and other African-American athletes were awarded their gold medals, Hitler was conspicuously absent. Although reasons for Hitler's absence went unexplained, many observers felt he wished to avoid the humiliation of admitting that someone he considered inferior had just beaten a German. Jesse Owens went on to win gold medals in the 100-meter dash, the 200-meter dash, the long jump, and in the 400-meter relay.
Okay, so you can hopefully see there how Hitler had tried to use the games, and then after him, the unfortunate thing was that Jesse Owens was so superior that it actually demonstrated that black African Americans were just as strong, if not stronger, as the Aryan supremacy, which he was trying to convey to everybody. So Hitler was trying to use the games in one way, and then that got sort of thrown back in his face by Jesse Owens' remarkable achievement. All right, so do any of you know what black power is? Probably not. So what we'll do then, we'll have a look at this one here.
I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream
In 1968, America was being torn apart. It was involved in Vietnam, and civil rights legislation had been pushed through, but black Americans were saying it's not enough. We want to turn to more radical solutions.
You had, at that time, Dr. Martin Luther King and his followers. You had Malcolm X and his followers.
American unity sees the only hope for the black man in America in a strong Africa. And
Black Power was saying we want change now, and we insist on it. This isn't just a request, this is a demand.
Very few people had the avenue to tell people how it really was or how we felt about a certain issue. You had to have a platform.
To win gold medals for one's country and still feel a second-class citizen is the bitter paradox facing many colored Americans.
Because we were black athletes, what we were supposed to do is run real fast and go home, smile, get pats on the back, and still be relegated to second-class living.
Tommy Smith sets a new world record in the 200 meters with John Carlos taking the prize.
And I'm supposed to stand up there and look at the flag, put my hand over my heart, saying how proud I am because this flag has represented me? I don't think so, because it did not. So when the national anthem started playing, I was not looking at the ground. I was praying, the Lord's Prayer. My head bowed and my fist went up in the air. I wore black gloves to represent social power or black power. I wore socks, not shoes, to represent poverty. I wore a black scarf around my neck to symbolize the lynching, the hangings that black folks went through while building this country.
And their fists clenched defiantly in the air. I think that is one of the most abiding political images of the entire century.
Okay, so Mexico 1968. So there you can clearly see the use of the Olympics to make a protest about inequality in the USA. And I suppose the question you have to ask is, does this follow the values of bringing people together and countries together? Quite an important discursive point there. Okay, so in Munich 1972, imagine you were the International Olympic Committee. Would you let the Games have carried on after this event had taken place? Now, okay, here we go.
Is that, quote, all hell is broken loose out there, that there's still shooting going on, that there's a report of a burning helicopter.
And the worst words I ever heard in my ear when was that he said, Jim, we've finally gotten clearance to put it on the air.
When I was a kid, my father used to say, our greatest hopes and our worst fears are seldom realized. Our worst fears have been realized tonight. They've now said that there were 11 hostages. 2 were killed in their rooms yesterday morning. 9 were killed at the airport tonight. They're all gone.
Okay, quite powerful. Okay, so just to make it clear what's actually happened there, 9 Israelis on the Olympic team were killed by some Arabian terrorists who broke into the Olympic Village. It's a huge issue for obvious reasons. And then the other thing is that the Games actually carried on. So it's a tough question to ask, that, isn't it? Would you have carried on with it, or would you have stopped it? But what we must recognise is this, that no longer is Baron de Coubertin's Olympic ideals being used. The Olympics are clearly being used now as political games. Other ones that we have is the boycott as a political move. So that's by not going to the Olympics. So in 1980, the Olympics were in Moscow, and Jimmy Carter, the president of the USA, decided to boycott the Games. And it was because Soviets had invaded Afghanistan 1 month previously. And Jimmy Carter gave them a month to get out, or he said that he would boycott the Games. And he did. So his team weren't there. So that year, the Americans didn't go. And it was, as I've mentioned, it's because they were opposed to the invasion of Afghanistan and the spread of communism, and the Russians feared of the Western influence just on their doorstep. Okay, so there they used it as a tool to demonstrate against some actions of another country. Now, fast forward to LA 1984, sod's law is that it's in LA. So for this, no surprise that the Soviets then decide to say niet, that they weren't going to go. And what happened was, not only did the Soviets not go, but nor did East Germany and other Eastern Bloc countries. So as you can see here, massive amount of boycotts taking place, using the Olympics as a political football. So the reasons, just for interest really, that the Russians said that they wouldn't go to LA was due to the lack of security for the Russian athletes. They were also opposed to the anti-Soviet hysteria that was being whipped up by the USA. Most people will turn around and say that it was a tit for tat because the Americans refused to turn up in 1980 at Moscow. Okay, there are loads of other examples, and if you have a look through any of these, you'll find evidence of the Olympics being used. For example, in Beijing, lots of political outcry about the use or the protests being exhibited by the Tibetans. They felt they were being treated unfairly. Obviously, China had invaded Tibet, so why didn't we boycott that one, you could argue. Human rights are obviously being violated, so what did we do about that? Okay, another one, for example, is when the Winter Games were in Sochi. You had Mr. Putin, who has anti-gay policies within his country. So what was done about that? So you can see it's a huge political tool. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at London 2012, if you look at that on a search and political issues, one of the things that comes up is that Britain's Olympics was a gold rush, provided a lesson for politics. In other words, how to run a games that was void of the political turmoils that have been in the last 50 to 60 years. So what would you have remembered from those games? Would it have been the extraordinary opening ceremony, or would it have been the fact that it was one of the first games that all women were represented in every single event? You saw the Britain having different ethnic minorities, gender representation. You know, it was an extraordinary celebration of the country. So is that what was shown, or were there other political issues? It's a very interesting point for you to pick up there. All right, that's the end of the screencast. Pause it, go back, take notes. But what we've recognised there is really strong examples of how the Olympics has become now a political tool as well as a sporting phenomena. Okay, thanks very much.